Morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I am Chloe Tetro. I'm the health coach with Ready Care. And for this morning, we're going to be looking at stress and brain health, which is a topic very prevalent, never goes out of fashion as such. So I'll be covering quite a bit in today's webinar, looking at what chronic stress does to the brain and how that can impact health in the long run. I'll be looking at recognizing the signs and symptoms of elevated cortisol levels and looking at some strategies to implement to combat some of that stress in the immediate term, short term, and long term. If you have any questions as they arise, please pop them into the comment box and I'll do my best to go through them. So let's get cracking. I'll probably have my slightly Speedy Gonzalez voice on for this morning because there's so much to cover. So we would know the chronic stress response very through the kind of simplistic terms of the body's fight or flight response, primarily governed by the hormone cortisol. So cortisol will get a fairly bad rap in this particular webinar, and I think it does in general. But it's important to recognize that cortisol in and of itself is not a bad hormone. It's not something we want rid of totally. It provides it has lots of different jobs in the body that are very that are necessary. So it would look at it mobilizes energy, it enhances alertness, regulates inflammation. So maintaining normal daily level functions in things like blood pressure, immune response, glucose metabolism, lots of things that are quite important. The difficulty that we're going to be talking about here is the chronic cortisol stress with prolonged elevated levels due to ongoing stressors, which can ultimately lead to quite severe health problems down the line. The key that we're looking at here is not to eradicate cortisol altogether, because that would be no good either. It's finding that balance where ultimately cortisol gets delivered to the body when it feels that we have that stress, that necessity for further for further help with the cortisol coming in. So chronically elevated cortisol levels, what do they look like? So I've mentioned some of them already, but really what you're looking at are things like fatigue, feeling constantly tired, lacking energy, even when you've gotten 6 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours of sleep, sometimes more than that. That feeling of being really, really flat, whatever happens. Weight gain is another big one. Unexplained weight gain. Nothing has changed in your activity levels and your eating patterns. However, particularly around the abdomen, cortisol can lead to an increase in fat storage. And you can kind of see that sometimes in individuals that might be quite trim, but they have a little pooch just around the abdomen, that little swell out. That's often called kind of cortisol belly or stress belly in other terms. Sleep disturbances would be another one. Difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep, or experiencing non-refreshing sleep. And if you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, if your body is flooded with all of these signals that say, hey, there's a lion nearby, or there's a storm brewing, we're very stressed here, we can't fall asleep because it is not safe. If our body is flooded with these types of hormones on a continual basis, the signals that it's getting, the message that it's getting is it's not safe to sleep. We need to be on high alert. So sleep disturbances is actually oftentimes the one that people will start to seek some type of additional support to target. Mood changes would be massive. Frequent mood swings, irritability, anxiety, even depression, digestive issues, gastrointestinal problems like indigestion, bloating, or susceptibility to infections, because essentially when your body is on really, really high stress, it'll start to kind of shut down or minimize activities in the body that it deems non-necessary to your immediate survival. And oftentimes things like digestion can be hit quite badly with those things. If you've ever gone through a period of chronic stress, a lot of people, if they say they're worried or anxious, They kind of naturally put their hands on their tummy. There's a kind of affinity there. Memory and concentration problems, which is essentially one of the parts that we'll go into further today. Difficulty focusing, poor memory, cognitive issues. And as I said, when the body goes, whoops, we better be on the lookout here because something really wrong is about to happen, it'll start to bring down some of it's basically trying to conserve energy as best it can. So things that are not immediate for survival, again, will start to come down. High blood pressure, elevated blood pressure, leading to hypertension. That's one we see a lot. People will also kind of put the hand on the heart with anxiety. It's kind of the body's way of knowing where you're being hit. Weakened immune system, picking up coughs and colds, increased vulnerability to illnesses because cortisol does an immunosuppressant effect as well. And that can be actually one of the ways that somebody who is so stressed, they don't know they're stressed. I've been there in my life at some points where I almost have the crazy eyes happening, which you guys might see sometimes when I've had too much coffee. I have the crazy eyes. I'm walking around like I'm up to 90 and people are saying, "She's, you're very stressed." And I go, "I'm not stressed at all." But I could be picking up infections, coughs, colds to beat the band. That's usually where I would be hit when I go through periods of chronic stress. Some people will see changes in skin issues like acne, bruising, slow wound healing. And for women, irregular menstrual cycles can happen, disruptions in the menstrual cycles. So those are some of the ways to recognize. Now, of course, taken in isolation, a lot of these things can have causes outside of elevated cortisol levels. What we're looking at here is a fuller, complex picture of if these things are showing up. If you're recognizing a few of these in a lattice of symptoms, it's quite probable that cortisol could be at the bottom of it. So let's have a look and a focus on what is it doing to the brain. Not great things, spoiler alert. It can significantly impact the brain structure and function. So we're talking even at a structural level, leading to cascaded physiological effects, as mentioned. So if you think of the brain as the command center, and there's loads of analogies for the brain, computer, car, these things, but essentially it's going to be your command center. It's highly susceptible to effects of prolonged stress. I heard a very good analogy that the brain was less like a computer and more like a really fine-tuned survival machine. That my brain goes straight to like Predator, those kind of aliens. So research conducted by McEwen in 2015 in a study called Chronic Stress, Cortisol Dysfunction and Pain Sensitivity showed a link between chronic stress and the alterations in the brain. One of the most critical aspects is the role of cortisol. So in response to chronic stress, cortisol levels become dysregulated, which consequently, these changes can result in actual shrinking of brain regions, which is frightening to me, particularly in the prefrontal cortex, which plays the central role in decision making, impulse control. Like I've definitely experienced way worse impulse control when I'm stressed. I've seen this at work, previous jobs specifically. But if you're ever in an office and you're extremely stressed and you send the email and then 10 minutes later you go, why did I send that email? Under any other circumstances, you'd have had the impulse control to not go, as per my last email. But essentially impulse control, which is in that part in the prefrontal cortex, and the prefrontal cortex, which also gets dubbed the CEO of the brain. It's a rational decision making, it's understanding big picture, it's understanding consequences, action, reaction, these kind of CEO type actions. And the hippocampus, which is the part of the brain more or less responsible, I used to say more or less because they all kind of take up each other's functions, but for brevity and simplicity, the hippocampus would be responsible for memory and learning. That can also take quite a bit of a hit, leading to what people would describe as brain fog, cognitive impairments. The negative impact that the elevated cortisol levels can't be understated. You'll have things like memory lapses, decreased attention span, difficulty making sound decisions. It's like, and I cannot stress this enough, no pun intended, are some of the ways that it would show itself with brain health. These would kind of show how important it is to manage stress. I actually find the learning and change adaptability. You know, we talk a lot about resilience in today's world with regards workplace setting, or even outside of workplace setting. The ability to manage change, to be quote unquote agile with change, is a lot of that comes from adaptability. It comes from learning new techniques, new methods when old ones no longer serve you. And I mean this across the board, professionally and personally. The ability to adapt to your environment is massively impaired. The ability to take on new information. I'm thinking even interpersonal relationships here. You know, if you have friends, families, partners, if there's a demand for a change in your behavior at any point, and your stress levels are through the roof, it's physiologically, and I'm not giving you an out here, physiologically, it becomes incredibly difficult to even engage the part of the brain that would bring on lateral thinking, adaptability, change. You know, the ability to even self-reflect on your own behaviors becomes impaired. So you're seeing there's a lot of like vicious cycle things happening here with regards. It's almost like catch 22. Domino effect of something goes wrong, your impulse control goes down, you start to act, and that, what's the word, cascades, domino effects throughout the day. It often happens that if you have one or two things go a little bit askew because your stress levels in the day, it just seems to be everything else comes crumbling. The house of cards comes down as well with it. So to get a little bit more in depth with that, the interplay between the brain, chronic stress, what you have is a vicious cycle that significantly impacts well-being. So well-being is a kind of, it's a different kettle of fish. My Irishisms are coming out here. it's a little bit different than just pure straight looking at health. Well-being is also your experience of your own life, your experience of your own health. So stress triggers a physiological response in the brain, including the activation of what's called the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal, which I'm going to call HPA because I can't keep saying that word. That response can lead to health issues, and I'm talking chronic, which impacts your well-being, impacts not just your health, but your experience of your health. Things like cardiovascular disease, obesity, mental health, these things that have a much broader impact than just that immediate, change in health levels. In 2010, there was a study called Stress and its Effects on the HPA Axis, Immune System, and the Brain. And that gave an insight into how the brain's response to stress can contribute to these health problems, leading to persistent activation of the HPA axis, resulting in elevated stress hormones like cortisol. Over time, these do impact and it signals the body to have things like hypertension, insulin resistance, massive one here, increased fat deposition, all risk factors for cardiovascular disease and obesity. Moreover, looking at it from a mental health perspective, conditions like anxiety and depression are very, very, very intrinsically linked with stress exposure. The brain's response to stress can disrupt neurotransmitter balance, actually altering mood regulating systems. So your systems are all in place to look after this really fine balance. When the cortisol is there, it actually skews the system altogether. So with the best of intentions, it can become incredibly difficult to get back to regulation. So for that reason, I'm like going on about the theoretical, this is terrible, but Chloe, what can we do about it? So strategies that would help for the management of chronic elevated cortisol. So I'm going to go to the obvious one first. Obvious because it has the research to back it. mindfulness, meditation, relaxation techniques. These are absolutely brilliant in promoting. I'm funny about the word resilience. I'm funny about it. Promoting a better sense of well-being with yourself and others. Um, a notable reference supporting this would be in the work of a gentleman called Herbert Benson and a lady called Miriam Clipper in their book, The Relaxation Response, which is a very good book, which I would recommend. It looks at the physiological and psychological benefits of relaxation techniques in the impact of stress. Um, the relaxation response, the name that they give to the book, is characterized by a reduction in heart rate and blood pressure, counteracting the initial stress response that we have, and helping individual to regain a sense of calm and equilibrium. So that sense of calm and equilibrium basically comes from a physiological activation of what's called your parasympathetic nervous system. So you have your sympathetic nervous system, which we think would be sympathetic to our well-being. Alas, it's sympathetic to our survival. So our sympathetic nervous system actually brings up our alertness. It brings up that tunnel vision. Where am I? Turns off things that are not necessary for our immediate survival. And basically it's your stress response. The parasympathetic nervous system then is basically that inverse. It's things coming back down. It's going from tunnel vision to receptivity, openness, being able to employ some of the lateral thinking, connect things together. Creativity would be very, very much within that realm. The ability for change, learning, adaptation, the ability to actually relax is in that as well. So what I'll do there is just kind of talk you a little bit through how do we turn the parasympathetic nervous system on in the immediate, and oftentimes this is the one that we don't particularly think of doing, and I always think this is a funny paradox. My words are quite nice now for this morning. It's a funny paradox because to me, it reminds me of being extremely angry and somebody saying to you, have you tried calming down? And you lose the plot and you go, I am calm. So trying to remind ourselves to employ some stress reduction techniques when our whole system is gone tunnel vision, we're not going to think laterally, we're not going to be able to self-reflect, we just have the thing, we've no impulse control, we're this kind of racing freight train. I recognize that it's a difficulty, but it's a good habit to get into, which is why understanding the triggers for it and being able to, even if you're somebody that actually can go, yeah, I recognize I fall into this category of very elevated cortisol levels. My stress response is a little bit all over the place. Jot them down. Jot down the symptoms of an immediately elevated cortisol levels and just throw it somewhere. Maybe somewhere a little bit private. Maybe not, right across the screen of your desktop. But knowing that you do go through those things, being able to have access to a constant reminder of, the list of symptoms is going to help go, yeah, okay, that's happening. I can see that's happening. Let's go to how do I bring myself down again? Deep breathing. So basically your breath can do an awful lot in the body. It can either stimulate your sympathetic nervous system if you do very short breaths. Hyperventilation. Basically, if you do very short breaths, it stimulates your sympathetic nervous system because your body goes, okay, we're in a situation where we're being activated. So if you notice your breaths are doing that, you are mechanistically telling your body to do something to bring up your stress response. So as obvious as it may sound, calming your breathing actually counteracts that, brings up the parasympathetic nervous system. So deep diaphragmatic breathing all the way down to the diaphragm, inhaling through the nose, counting for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4. That could be like box breathing, in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. Or otherwise, taking an in-breath, holding, and making sure that the out-breath is longer than the in-breath. The parasympathetic nervous system is stimulated by exhales. The sympathetic nervous system is stimulated by inhales. That's oversimplifying it, but as a kind of rule of thumb, that works fairly well. Taking a few minutes to practice mindful meditation, and I use marks here not to be disrespectful, but because oftentimes I think that using that terminology can have the idea that you have to sit in lotus pose in a quiet environment with very relaxing music and Tibetan bowls and all of this kind of thing. You absolutely don't have to do that. At its core, mindfulness is noticing. And if you're to take something away with regards mindfulness, and if there's mindfulness individuals that might go, Chloe, that's not it at all. But as a short takeaway, you don't have to have the ideal setup. It stands to you far greater to be able to find that moment of noticing and self-reflection in a busy environment. It's going to be far more helpful to you in that moment as an immediate response to the stress. And the other thing I'd say is engaging in brief physical activity, short walk, leave the desk for 2 minutes if you can. Most of the time, you can get away with 2 or 3 minutes. Just stretching, it releases endorphins. So exercise triggers the release of endorphins. If you have to go into a cubicle, do a few jumping jacks or this kind of motion. A really good one actually is tense. Tell yourself to tense all of your muscles as best as you can. I'm just thinking how dorky I look here. Tense all of them as best you can into your arms, your legs, your abdomen, everything. Tense all your muscles as tightly as you can and hold that until you find it tiring. And then tell yourself release. And what that does is, again, the body responds as your mind and your body respond. It's two sides of the same coin, not two parts of the same coin. If you've mechanically released tension, the mind tends to follow. And what that does is it releases endorphins, which counteract your stress hormone. I found that one brilliant actually before that. On a short-term days to weeks, in a short-term days to weeks way, healthy eating, balanced diet, whole foods, good vegetables, decreasing things like sugar and high carbohydrates because they will sugar's ups and downs have a psychological effect as well. It can make stress more pronounced, especially if there's ups and downs, crashes of energy, crashes in moods, cravings going up, all of these kind of things. They very much follow. Your stress levels will very much follow with that. Prioritizing quality sleep is very, very important. And as we'd mentioned, sometimes when your body is flooded with cortisol, it's very hard to go to sleep, or it's very hard to fall asleep because your entire body has been told it's not safe to fall asleep. So prior to going into bed, really, really taking the time to notice that you've had a stressful day and that you need to counteract with any activity that has been shown to reduce cortisol levels and to bring down the sympathetic, bring up the parasympathetic nervous system. Muscle relaxation, like we mentioned. Yoga, very, very good for that. Yin yoga, particularly, it's a type of yoga that's more about like connecting to the body, allowing that kind of the body to relax down into poses rather than, that kind of high energy Ashtanga type of routine. Taking something that's deliberately slowing down and deliberately getting your muscles to relax down will have a positive impact on the brain. I've actually found journaling is absolutely brilliant for me because if I'm up in my head, once it goes down onto paper, I've taken all of that stream, condensed it, and it's almost like an exorcism for me and for lots of other people with regards getting some of those thoughts out on paper. You don't have to ruminate on them anymore. And then long term, so we're talking kind of months and beyond that, exercise, regular exercise, and whatever exercise is for you, that is fine. Not everybody can get out to the gym. Not everybody can take classes, not everybody can go horse riding, not everybody can do certain things, but find exercise that works for you that you actually enjoy doing. Um, if you like to follow along with a video on YouTube or the TV, if you like to listen to podcasts, going for a walk while listening to a podcast and taking that time just as you time. Um, if you'd like to go to exercise classes and channel the rage through a spinning bike, fantastic. Get some of the stress out. Aiming for at least 150 minutes of moderate activity per week has been shown to really, really help to regulate chronic cortisol levels over time. Stress management, like the 8 weeks MBS or mindfulness courses. They can be found online. They can be found almost anywhere. They're absolutely fantastic, evidence-led reduction in stress levels. Social support, which is one I'll touch into a little bit more before we end. I need to end quickly now. I'm getting over time. Social support is basically maintaining a strong social support network, interacting with friends, loved ones, and getting social connections. We're social creatures, and our stress levels tend to deeply go down when we're in an environment where we feel relaxed, we can be ourselves, and we have an opportunity to vent. And of course, if you're finding it difficult to get a handle on the stress within the parameters mentioned, actually looking for somebody who can help, things like counselors, well-being therapists, etc. So I've ran slightly over time for today, so I'll cut the longer social support, but basically it's incredibly important for us to reach out to our connections. It is one of the best ways to reduce that. Even bringing one of your friends along for a walk would be very good for that. So to summarize, chronic stress and chronic elevated cortisol levels have a massive impact on your brain health, your physiological health, your ability to experience your life in the best capacity that you can. Recognize the symptoms of it and actually remind yourself to employ the habit of counteracting them. It will absolutely stand to you, and you will have a much greater experience of your day, and health and well-being will get a lot better. That's me for today. Thank you very much for listening, and we will chat to you again. If you've any comments you'd like to pop in, I'd love to hear from you. I will get rid of my little strategy sign there. Otherwise, that's me for today, guys. Andrew will be back next week, I believe. And in the meantime, deep breathing. We'll see you later. Bye now.